Okay, so this is our experiment, and my older son Wayne wants to call it Cooking with Pops, and my oldest grandson Brad is the photographer slash sous chef. You can't see Brad because he's behind the camera, but trust me, he helped me get this done. So whether this goes on YouTube or not, it's going to go on for the family to be able to look at. First thing I want to tell you when you do this kind of cooking is I try to keep it real simple. As I was telling Brad before, we're talking about the 1, 2, 3, 4 method for spaghetti sauce, which is what we're going to make today. So we have 1 tablespoon of basil, 1 tablespoon of parsley, 2 tablespoons of basil, 3 tablespoons of oregano, and 3 bay leaves. Now, as every recipe, once you've made the recipe, if you want to change the taste a little bit, feel free. Okay? That's what I've been making for 50 years, and everybody seems to like it, so that's what we stay with. Now, then to make it even simpler, 1, 2, 3, 4 is 4 cans of tomato sauce. Now, you can substitute whole tomatoes, you can substitute diced tomatoes, but remember, if you do that, put a little more salt in it because they're not seasoned. I like tomato sauce because it has a little bit of seasoning in it, okay? So, if you'll take a look, we diced up 1 onion. We diced up about 3 tablespoons of garlic. Okay, so we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 onion, 3 tablespoons of garlic. We're going to put olive oil in the bottom of the pan. We're going to put a little bit of wine. Now, typically the classic Italian spaghetti sauce would be equal parts beef, pork, and veal. Okay, veal's pretty hard to find these days, plus it's pretty expensive. So what we have is equal parts of beef and pork, ground beef and ground pork. So the first thing we're going to do is I have this pan on the stove, and another important thing is when you're cooking, you never put oil in the cold pan. So my pan is preheated, and I've got it preheated on low. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the bottom of the pan with olive oil. At least I plan on covering the bottom of the pan with olive oil if I can get the olive oil open. Okay. Alrighty. Any oil will do, but I typically like olive oil. Number 1 is we're working on low heat, so you won't have a high smoke point. And number 2, obviously olive oil imparts an Italian flavor to it. So next thing we do is we pop open our meats, and we add our meats to the pan. They will be already hot because we used hot oil. Using a wooden spoon, you crumble it up. You see it's going to be browning pretty quickly. Now we'll add the pork. And as you add the pork, it continues to cool the pan down. So now we have 2 pounds of meat. And again, the ratios, 2 pounds works pretty good for my ratios. I'm going to turn this down a little bit because this is Shannon's new stove and I'm not quite sure how it works. But you can hear it, the sizzle calming down. We're going to brown this meat nicely. Right now this is 1 pound of pork, 1 pound of ground beef. You want to make chicken, use chicken. You want to just use beef, you want to just use hamburger, any of that's fine. But the magic number is 2 pounds of it. 2 pounds of meat to 4 cans of tomato sauce. You'll have a nice meat-laden sauce. Now this sauce, we're doing this in real time too, by the way. We're not stopping and setting things up. We did our prep work before we turned it on. All we're doing now is see it browns up very quickly. So we take that, and that's going to do its own thing here. I'm going to actually turn it back to where I had it. Now I would normally turn on the exhaust, but then you couldn't hear what I'm saying. So while that is browning up and while it's getting hotter again, we're going to go ahead and add the onions first, because we want to sweat the onions. And by sweating the onions, that means we cook them down a little bit so they're soft, and all the flavor inside of the onions releases into the gravy. This was one big onion. If you like more or less onions, you add more or less onions. But for our recipe, one big onion, and it's got to be a big onion. If you have small onions, you should add 2. You can see we're sweating these onions. Don't be in a hurry, but also, this is not the stage to leave it unattended, because we're starting to build the layers. First layer was olive oil, second layer was protein, third layer was the root vegetable, which was the onion. Now in Italy, in addition to the onion, they'll put a half a carrot, because whether you know it or not, carrot is one of the sweetest vegetables that there is, and it imparts natural sugar. So this is browning up nicely. In fact, we're almost browned. Okay, so that's nicely. Now, the next thing we put in is we'll put in the aromatics. So it doesn't matter what order you put them in, but this is the parsley. I'm sorry, this is the oregano. We put the oregano in. We'll go ahead and mix it in. And if this was smell-o-vision, it really smells wonderful here. And by doing it this way, the same way when you toast the onions, you release the juices from the onions. When you toast your spices bloom. You release the oils, you release the flavor, so you get the full effect of your spices in your sauce rather than adding them directly to the sauce. Onions are loosening up. They have gone from the bright white to now they're starting to get a little translucent, and that's exactly what you want. By the time the sauce is done, the onions are actually going to be transparent. You may not even see them in the sauce. So now we'll take the basil and we'll add the basil to the sauce. And if you notice, keep a towel handy. I'm using a towel to hold the handle of the pot so I don't burn my hand. Okay, now we can see these onions getting translucent. We can smell the bloom of the spices. Now I'm going to pull the bay leaf out of here, because I don't really want to brown the bay leaf. Now this is the parsley flakes, and that's the last of my spices that we're going to mix in there. Now you notice, if you've been paying attention, there's one thing I haven't put in yet. I haven't put in the garlic. There's a good reason for that. Garlic browns up the fastest, and if you burn your garlic, it gets very strong and very bitter. So you don't want to burn. You want to do everything first where you brown this stuff up. The onions are getting translucent. We've got all of our spices in now, with the exception of salt and pepper, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I have the tendency not to salt the foods until the end, for the very reason that when you use tomato sauce contains salt. We're going to put some Parmesan cheese in at the end. That contains salt. So we'll use a little sprinkle of salt, but we want to make sure we don't over salt. Okay? So this is bubbling nicely. So now, here comes the garlic. So with the addition of the garlic, you've added most all of what you're going to put in there. So we'll mix this in, and I just want the garlic, the onions are almost transparent, which is perfect. The meat is brown, which is perfect. If you take a look, that's a lot of meat. But when we get to the sauce, it won't look like a lot of meat. Now remember, this sauce, those 4 cans, you can probably feed 8 to 12 people with this sauce. So you're making an awful lot of food in a little bit of time. Okay? This is cooked up perfectly. The garlic is just softening a little bit, and this is real time now. We've probably been doing this maybe 5 minutes at most. We've been doing this. So now we have the 4 cans of tomato paste. And the pot is bubbling away, which is a good thing, because when we put this tomato sauce when we put this tomato sauce in, it's going to absorb the heat and it's going to cool the pan down for a second. And I don't drain any oil or anything out of it. Sometimes people like to drain oil. If you're going to go on a diet, you're not going to want to eat this kind of spaghetti sauce. You can eat something different. You can drain it if you want to. You can use chicken if you want to, but this is the real thing. And the oil mixing with all the spices and all the protein lends itself to a wonderful, wonderful taste. Okay, now don't throw these cans out yet. All right? Because this, like anything else, you've heard cooks say when they make a sauce or when they make a gravy, they reduce. You reduce the liquid. What reduction means is the liquid evaporates and you have more solids. When this spaghetti sauce cooks, it's going to do the same thing. It is going to reduce, and when it reduces, it makes the flavor a lot more pungent. So what we're going to do, we're going to stir this a little bit, and it's going to come right back up the temp. And as it's coming back up the temp, we're going to now add the bay leaves. And when you're done with your sauce at the very end, you ought to pull the bay leaves out. It's not a big deal, but somebody may or may not want to take a bite out of a bay leaf, so you just never know. Now, wine. I always put wine in my sauce for 2 reasons. Very acid. Tomatoes are very high acid content, okay? Wine has a little bit of sugar. The sugar in the wine offsets the acid, so it brings your sauce back into balance. Typically, in addition to the wine, I'll put a little bit of honey or I'll put a little bit of sugar in addition to that, again to soften it. Or if God forbid you make the mistake and oversalt the sauce. Oversalt anything. If you oversalt your chili, if you oversalt your spaghetti sauce, if you add too much salt and you have the salty taste, you can put enough sugar in to soften the salt to take the salt taste away. So what I'm going to do with the wine is I'm going to fill one of the empty cans about 3/4 full of wine. Then I'm going to stand over the pot so I don't make a mess, and I'm going to transfer from one can to the other, turning the can as I do. So this way I steal all the bits of tomato sauce left in the can, and it gets mixed in with the wine, and we actually end up putting a little more tomato and a little more wine. If you take a look at that can's pretty clean, right? If you take a look at this can that we haven't done yet, you have a lot of tomato sauce in it. So we switch the cans to make sure that we get all the tomato out of the cans. Remember to turn so you get all the grooves and all the sides and you get all that stuff done. Okay, what do you think, Brad? Have we got clean cans?
Pretty clean to me.
Great, great. Now, we got clean cans. We're going to mix this stuff in, and I'm going to just make sure everything's covered, and I'm going to stir it. So I've left the temperature alone. I want this thing to come back up to high, and then I'm going to reduce it. Once it starts bubbling a lot, I'm going to reduce the heat to a simmer, so you just have a little simmer, and for the first half hour or 45 minutes, I'm going to cook it uncovered because I want it to reduce. I want to intensify the wine flavor, I want to intensify the garlic flavor, I want to intensify the tomato flavors. So I'm going to reduce, when it's reduced by, I would say, when you look at your pot, you'll be able to see, depending on the kind of pot. Remind me, Brad, we'll come and talk about pots in a second. When you reduce it by about 1/4, then you cover it and continue to simmer it. And the total time to cook this, for me, people like to say 4 to 6 hours. Well, that's crazy. The real world is if you reduce it for an hour, cook it, cover it for an hour, you have pretty good sauce. There's no real reason to cook it more than that. Now, I started to talk to you about pots. You say, why is Pops talking about pots? Well, there's all kinds of pots. These pots that I'm cooking with today are my daughter-in-law Shannon's, and they happen to be over 20 years old. They're Calphalon Teflon pots. And Teflon is fine for what we're doing. Stainless steel would be better because stainless steel tends to sear and cook things better. But when you're making chili or spaghetti sauce, one kind of pot you don't want to do is cast iron. If you take a cast iron pot, a cast iron frying pan, a cast iron big skillet, and you cook high acid tomatoes in it, you'll cause your seasoning of the cast iron will come off, and if you're not careful, they can rust on you and they can impart flavor to what you're cooking because the acid breaks it down. So be careful. In my world, I never cook spaghetti sauce in cast iron pots, which I love my cast iron pots. In fact, if you want to brown your protein in a cast iron pot and add it to this pot, that's fine because you can't beat cast iron. However, it's not worth the mess to dirty 2 pots and pans. Stainless pans and Calphalon pans will work fine, but I would recommend everybody go out and buy a 10 or 12 quart stainless steel pot with a lid. It'll be a great chili pot, it'll be a great spaghetti sauce pot, and it's just what you need. So if you can see now, my spaghetti sauce is coming to a boil again. It's coming up high. I'm liking the smell. So I'm going to put a tablespoon of sugar. Actually, if there were sugar in the sugar bowl, I would put a tablespoon of sugar in there. But since there's not sugar in the sugar bowl, I'm either going to put a squirt of honey, a squirt of agave. People put maple syrup. Now I got to tell you, that might be good for some folks. My Italian grandparents would disown me if they said I put maple syrup in there. So I'm looking through Shannon's cupboard here.
There's honey right there.
Where is it? Honey, okay. So we'll take some honey. And actually I love honey for this. It does a very nice job. I would say about 2 tablespoons of honey. Sometimes your honey will get a little stuck in your jar. If that happens to you, throw it in the microwave for 30 seconds and it'll be fine. But you see how we got a nice bubble going here? That's going to evaporate and reduce nicely. We'll get that honey incorporated. That'll take the edge off of the acid on the tomatoes, and it'll help the wine, and it'll impart just a little back flavor, which is, I kind of like it. So now, there's one more step, and this is a step that separates spaghetti sauces. A lot of people don't know it, don't use it, or may be afraid to try it. Buy some good cheese. Don't buy the green box cheese. You know, I'm just telling you, don't buy it. Go spend $4 or $5. This is Bellicosio cheese. It's a nice cheese. It's a quality cheese. You'll be glad you did. In fact, when you put the Parmesan cheese on your spaghetti, you can use the good cheese for all of that. So I'm going to cut the top off of this. And we're going to put about 1/4 of a cup. When I say 1/4 of a cup, that's a nice fistful. And what happens with this, you get the velvety flavor, you get the background of the cheese, you get the salt from the cheese. So we won't be doing any salt until this is done. And when it's done, I'll taste it. And if it needs salt, I'll put salt. If I don't need salt, I won't put any salt in. So we take that, you can see it starts to disappear. You don't even know. And one of the advantages of the Teflon pan is this won't stick to the bottom of the pan. Now, full disclosure, when you use a stainless steel pan, which I prefer, yeah, you better be ready to spend a little bit of time cleaning the cheese off the bottom of the stainless steel pan. Not a big deal. Comes right off, but it's not like the Teflon where there's nothing that sticks to it. So what you're looking at right now, and I'm looking at the clock, I would say, Brad, this video has probably been 12 or 13 minutes, pretty close.
Almost 20 minutes.
Almost 20 minutes for the spaghetti sauce video. So I would tell you that this is going to conclude our video for today, and the next chapter of this video is going to be Pops' Chili. So we look forward to it, and if you have any questions, there'll be information posted on the side. You can reach out to us, like us if you like us. We may go viral, you just never know. Thank you.